They preach that blood is thicker than water, forgetting one rule of the wild: blood just attracts the sharks. My father thought I was an unlocked safe, born to fund my sister's extravagant mistakes. But when you corner a woman and steal her identity for $80,000, you do not create a victim. You wake up an architect of ruin. Do not look away. The price of their betrayal is not money, but their entire lives. Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us. Now, let's begin the story. My name is Hannah Freeman. At 32 years of age, I have built an impenetrable fortress around myself. As the Director of Strategy at Vanguard Nexus Consulting in Austin, Texas, my life is a relentless cycle of risk assessments, corporate restructuring, and high-stakes negotiations. I am paid heavily to see disasters coming before they strike. Yet, on a rare Tuesday evening, the one night I finally managed to silence my work phone and pour a single glass of red wine, I did not see the hurricane heading straight for my front door. The heavy oak door of my apartment shuddered violently. The knocking was not a request for entry. It was a physical assault on my peace. The sound echoed through the quiet space, vibrating against the hardwood floors and shattering the sanctuary I had fought so hard to build. I set my wine glass down on the granite counter, my pulse instantly accelerating. I did not need to look through the peephole. I knew that aggressive, rhythmic pounding anywhere. Before I could even reach for the brass handle, Arthur, the man I was biologically obligated to call my father, pushed his way inside. He did not wait for an invitation. He did not offer a single word of greeting. He simply breached my perimeter, bringing the suffocating humidity of the Texas night and the overwhelming scent of his heavy cologne directly into my living room. His presence was an immediate suffocation, sucking the oxygen out of my carefully curated space. He moved with the entitlement of a king inspecting a conquered territory, his heavy leather shoes leaving damp smudges on my immaculate rug. Without breaking his stride, he marched straight to my glass coffee table and slammed a crumpled, thick manila folder onto its fragile surface. The sharp slap of the paper against the glass sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. $80,000, Arthur commanded. His voice was a low, gravelly bark that left absolutely no room for negotiation or debate. Transfer it to Chloe before 12 noon tomorrow. Her husband got into a little trouble. He did not look at me when he said it. He was already pacing toward the large floor-to-ceiling windows, inspecting the downtown Austin skyline, as if calculating exactly how much he could sell it for. I stood frozen near the kitchen island. $80,000. The demand hung in the air, toxic and heavy. My sister, Chloe, the golden child, the fragile angel who needed constant rescuing from her own reckless choices. But $80,000 was not a missed credit card payment or a slight overdraft. This was catastrophic. I approached the table slowly, my hands strangely steady despite the sudden freezing sensation spreading through my chest. I opened the crumpled folder. My eyes, trained to scan complex legal documents for hidden loopholes and corporate liabilities, darted across the pages. It was a high-risk business loan contract. The interest rates were entirely predatory, the terms absolute financial suicide. But that was not what made my stomach violently churn. There, at the very bottom of the final page, right next to the glaring red signature line, was my name, my electronic signature, forged with terrifying calculated precision. The room started to spin. A wave of pure, unadulterated nausea crashed over me. They had not just come to ask for money. They had stolen my identity. They had chained me to a sinking ship of debt without my knowledge. If this loan defaulted, and with Chloe and her husband, default was a guaranteed certainty, my pristine credit, my hard-earned career at Vanguard Nexus, my entire financial foundation would turn to ash. The primal instinct to scream clawed at my throat. I wanted to hurl the glass table across the room. I wanted to tear the fraudulent papers to shreds and call the police right then and there. My chest heaved, my breath turning shallow as the sheer magnitude of his betrayal settled deep into my bones. He was willing to sacrifice my entire life just to cushion my sister's fall. But I am a strategist. I survive by reading the board and playing the long game. Exploding would achieve nothing but giving him the exact reaction he wanted. He thrived on my anger. He fed on my resistance before crushing it with his authority. I forced the bitter bile back down my throat. I took a slow, deliberate breath, smoothing my facial features into a mask of perfect, compliant neutrality. When I finally looked up at him, I offered a faint, defeated smile. The smile of a broken daughter who knew her place in the family hierarchy. "I understand," I said softly, making sure my voice carried the exact tremor of resignation he expected to hear. "I will handle it." Arthur turned around, a triumphant half-smile spreading across his aging face. He had won, or so he completely believed. He adjusted the lapels of his expensive jacket, satisfied that his human bank account had dispensed the necessary funds without a fight. He walked toward the door, pausing just as his hand grabbed the handle. He looked back over his shoulder, his eyes cold and completely devoid of any paternal warmth. "Do not disappoint me," he said, his words slicing through the room like a physical blade. "You know how I can destroy your career." The door clicked shut behind him, leaving me utterly alone with the fraudulent contract. The silence rushed back into the room, but it was no longer peaceful. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a ticking bomb. The second the lock engaged, the illusion of the frightened, obedient daughter vanished. I did not collapse onto the sofa. I did not bury my face in my hands. The tremor of resignation I had carefully projected for Arthur evaporated, replaced by a cold, crystalline focus. I walked directly to the spare bedroom, which I had converted into a fortress of data. I tapped the spacebar on my mechanical keyboard, and instantly, 3 large curved monitors flared to life, casting a harsh blue luminescence across the darkened room. This was my domain. Arthur believed his brute force and raised voice were the ultimate weapons. He fundamentally misunderstood the modern battlefield. Power did not reside in yelling. Power lived in the servers, the routing numbers, the hidden digital ledgers. I sat in my ergonomic chair and pulled the crumpled manila folder toward me. I flattened the high-risk business loan contract on the desk, my eyes locking onto the routing codes and the fictitious corporate entity listed as the lender. I booted up Vanguard Nexus Consulting's proprietary forensic accounting software. It was a tool designed to dissect multinational corporate mergers and detect offshore tax havens, and now I was pointing its heavy artillery directly at my own family. My fingers flew across the keyboard, a rapid, percussive rhythm in the quiet house. I initiated a deep web scrape, cross-referencing the lender's tax identification number with state registries and international banking databases. The algorithms chewed through the data, stripping away the carefully constructed layers of shell companies. It took exactly 14 minutes to hit bedrock. When the final schematic populated on my center screen, the mask of the unreasonable demand fell away, revealing the grotesque truth underneath. There was no high-risk business loan. Chloe's husband had not made a foolish investment. The entire document sitting on my desk was a theater prop. The $80,000 was not a debt owed to a predatory lender. It was a glaring, gaping deficit in a ghost investment fund. The data trees on my screen showed a complex web of phantom assets, inflated capital, and offshore transfers. Arthur and Chloe had been running an unregulated shadow fund, siphoning money from legitimate family accounts and hiding it from the Internal Revenue Service. But they had gotten sloppy. A miscalculation had triggered an audit flag, leaving them $80,000 short of covering their tracks before the end of the fiscal quarter. They were not asking me to bail them out of a mistake. They were using my immaculate credit score and my unblemished corporate reputation as a human shield. The forged signature was designed to make me the official guarantor of this ghost fund. They were laundering their dirty money through my clean name. I leaned back in my chair, the blue light of the monitors reflecting in my eyes. A hollow metallic sensation spread through my chest. For 32 years, I had analyzed my family dynamic through the lens of a neglected child hoping to eventually earn her place. I remembered working 3 part-time jobs during my university years, surviving on instant noodles, while Arthur bought Chloe a brand new European convertible for passing her freshman exams. I remembered the endless stream of her credit card bills that he silently expected me to help cover once I secured my executive position. I had always categorized it as extreme favoritism, unfair, toxic, but ultimately just a tragic family flaw. I was wrong. Looking at the federal fraud blueprint glowing on my screens, the last tether of familial obligations snapped. It was a clean, silent break. There was no wave of sorrow. There were no tears blurring my vision. The wounded inner child who just wanted her father to be proud of her was completely, utterly dead. In her place sat a strategist analyzing a hostile corporate takeover. They were not my family. They were a parasitic entity that had attached itself to my financial spine, and they were preparing to deliver a fatal dose of venom. If I transferred $80,000 to Chloe by 12 noon tomorrow, it would not be a ransom payment. In the eyes of the federal government, the transfer would validate the forged contract. It would establish a clear paper trail connecting my personal banking to their money laundering syndicate. I would become an active, willing co-conspirator in a federal financial crime. When the house of cards inevitably collapsed, Arthur and Chloe would simply point to my signature and my wire transfer. I would face decades in a federal penitentiary, and they would walk away playing the victims of a rogue daughter. He had warned me not to disappoint him, threatening to destroy my career. He was already actively destroying my entire life. A freezing, absolute calm washed over me. I reached out and gently traced the forged signature on the paper. I was not going to pay them a single cent. I was not going to call the police and let a slow-moving legal system give them time to destroy the evidence. They wanted to use the financial system to enslave me. I would use their own hidden financial architecture to bury them alive. They had unknowingly handed the keys of their criminal enterprise to the one person who knew exactly how to lock all the doors from the outside. I reached into the top drawer of my desk and pulled out a heavy steel analog timer. I twisted the dial. The loud, rhythmic ticking began to echo in the room, harmonizing with the humming of my servers. I picked up my encrypted mobile device. It was past 1 in the morning, but Marcus Sterling billed at $900 an hour specifically because he did not sleep when a client was in jeopardy. He was a ruthless white-collar defense attorney, the kind of man you called when federal agencies started circling. "Marcus," I said the moment the line connected, "I have a situation involving interstate financial fraud and forged signatures. My Social Security number has been compromised by an immediate family member." "Give me the directives, Hannah." His voice was crisp, entirely devoid of fatigue. "I need a complete legal firewall. Initiate an emergency decoupling of my identity from all unverified debt instruments originating from Arthur Freeman. File the preemptive identity theft affidavits with the Federal Trade Commission and draft an ex parte restraining order based on financial extortion. Do it quietly. Absolutely no one gets served until I give the explicit command. Consider it done. I will have the filings stamped before the courthouses open." With the legal perimeter completely secured, I turned my attention to my capital. If Arthur realized his initial trap had failed, his immediate instinct would be to initiate a retaliatory strike, likely attempting to freeze my legitimate bank accounts through frivolous litigation to starve me into submission. I could not leave my liquid assets exposed. I opened a highly secure, encrypted portal to my offshore fiduciary firm. With a complex series of keystrokes and multiple biometric verifications, I initiated a sweeping asset transfer. Every single cent of my savings, my aggressive stock portfolios, and my liquid investments vanished from domestic banking networks. The funds were funneled instantly into an irrevocable blind trust, a specialized financial vault locked so tightly that not even a federal judge could easily breach it without a multi-year investigation. I was now, on paper, entirely broke, yet in reality, entirely untouchable. Now it was time to transition from defensive maneuvers to a calculated offense. Years ago, when Arthur first launched his supposedly legitimate real estate holding company, he had forced me to design and implement the internal corporate accounting network. He framed it as helping with the books, effectively leveraging his parental authority to acquire free enterprise-grade architecture. He was far too arrogant and far too cheap to ever update the core administrative protocols after I left. I routed my connection through a secure virtual private network and bypassed his severely outdated firewall using my original master administrator credentials. The family company ledgers expanded across my 3 screens. It was a chaotic, poorly managed mess of commingled funds and questionable write-offs. I systematically located the primary tax routing transit numbers, the vital financial arteries connecting his hidden shell companies to the Internal Revenue Service. Using a sophisticated string of automated scripts, I altered the destination codes. I did not steal a single dime of his money. I simply redirected every single pending tax liability, every corporate penalty, and every hidden audit trigger directly to Arthur's personal residential internet protocol address and his private social security number. When the federal algorithms inevitably detected the massive financial discrepancy, the system would not see a random corporate error. It would see a deliberate, malicious evasion orchestrated directly from his personal desktop. My sister required a different, more immediate kind of surgical strike. Chloe's entire identity and social standing were anchored in luxury she did not earn. I accessed the primary banking portals handling the exorbitant leases for her 2 European sports cars and her heavily utilized black credit cards. I did not need to launch a cyber attack against these institutions. I simply utilized the anonymous fraud reporting tools built into their public-facing interfaces. I flagged a pattern of highly suspicious international transfers and submitted a detailed automated tip citing compromised income verification and potential money laundering. It was more than enough to trigger their zero-tolerance automated security protocols. The banking algorithms, notoriously ruthless and completely devoid of human empathy, would immediately freeze her limitless lines of credit and issue priority repossession orders to protect their physical assets. Her artificial high society life was scheduled for total demolition by breakfast. By 4 a.m, the digital slaughter was absolute. I closed the remote servers and utilized a military-grade wiping program to scrub the hard drives of my local machine. From the hall closet, I retrieved a small, polished wooden box. Inside the velvet lining, I carefully placed 3 specific items: a single encrypted flash drive containing a highly destructive payload, a cheap prepaid burner phone, and a handful of shredded scrap paper just to provide a convincing weight. I taped the box shut and affixed a priority overnight courier label addressed directly to Arthur's executive office desk. I packed a single leather duffel bag with essential clothing and my secure laptop. I walked out of my luxury apartment, leaving the expensive keys resting on the granite kitchen island. I did not look back. The air was cool and thick with humidity as I started the engine of my vehicle. The sky over Austin was just beginning to turn a bruised dark purple. I merged onto the interstate highway, pointing my car east. My destination was a secluded timber cabin nestled deep within the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina, a remote property I had purchased entirely in cash under a hidden holding company late last year. No one in my family knew it existed. I had a long, grueling drive ahead of me, but as the highway lines blurred past my headlights, the heavy, suffocating weight I had carried for over 3 decades finally lifted off my chest. The timer was steadily counting down, and the trap was perfectly set. The sun hung high above the dense, emerald canopy of the Blue Ridge Mountains, casting long, sharp shadows across the winding asphalt. It was exactly 11:45 in the morning. Inside the insulated cabin of my heavy sport utility vehicle, the only sound was the steady, rhythmic hum of the tires against the road and a soft jazz melody playing from the satellite radio. I pulled over at a deserted scenic overlook, shifting the heavy transmission into park. I poured a cup of black coffee from my steel thermos, watching the steam rise into the cool mountain air. The atmosphere outside was crisp, smelling strongly of pine needles and damp earth. It was a staggering contrast to the suffocating leather and aggressive cologne stench of Arthur's presence the night before. I opened my encrypted laptop, resting it carefully on the center console. My secure dashboard showed the digital tracking beacon attached to the package I had sent. The status updated in real time, delivered. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the scalding coffee, letting the caffeine sharpen my focus. The board was completely set. The pieces were firmly locked in their inevitable positions. All that remained was for the arrogant king to make his final, fatal move. Hundreds of miles away, at exactly 11:50 in the morning, the heavy glass doors of Arthur Freeman's sprawling corner office swung open. His executive assistant, a perpetually nervous woman who flinched every time he raised his voice, scurried into the expansive room. She was carrying a small, polished wooden box. She placed it precisely in the absolute center of his massive mahogany desk and retreated quickly without speaking a single word. Arthur did not even bother to look up from his financial quarterly reports. He was riding a massive wave of absolute, unshakable euphoria. Breaking my will had been effortless, exactly as he had confidently anticipated. In his mind, I was nothing more than a highly efficient corporate appliance, functioning perfectly the moment he applied a little forceful maintenance. He leaned back in his imported Italian leather chair, interlacing his fingers behind his head, and stared intensely at the wooden box. He confidently assumed it held a certified cashier's check for $80,000, or perhaps the notarized wire transfer confirmation documents. The physical delivery was a nice, dramatic touch of submission, he thought to himself, a tangible wooden trophy representing his absolute authority over my entire life. The antique grandfather clock standing in the far corner of his office began its deep, resonant chime. It was exactly 12 o'clock noon. The deadline had officially arrived. Arthur leaned forward, a smug, highly predatory smile stretching across his aging face. He grabbed a heavy silver letter opener and swiftly sliced through the thick packing tape sealing the box. He flipped the wooden lid open, ready to mentally allocate the $80,000 back into his ghost fund to appease the federal auditors. However, his triumphant smile froze. It did not immediately falter. It simply crystallized into a rigid mask of pure, unadulterated confusion. There was no certified cashier's check. There were no signed wire transfer documents. Resting on a pathetic bed of useless shredded paper was a cheap plastic flip phone, a single black flash drive, and a small square of white cardstock. Arthur snatched the cardstock angrily. The handwriting was mine, precise and utterly devoid of any emotional weakness. It read, "You want control? Run it yourself." Before his brain could even begin to process the sheer audacity of the insult, the cheap plastic phone resting inside the box vibrated violently against the wood, emitting a shrill, piercing ringtone. The sound was horribly jarring, an abrasive intrusion into his quiet, heavily insulated financial empire. Arthur dropped the note and grabbed the device, flipping it open aggressively and pressing it hard against his ear. He fully expected to hear my voice, perhaps crying, begging for a little more time, or pleading desperately for his forgiveness. Instead, he was greeted by the cold, metallic tone of an automated banking system. "Attention," the robotic female voice stated flatly. "This is a mandatory security alert regarding your primary enterprise accounts. All associated credit lines, including commercial leasing and personal overdraft facilities, have been indefinitely frozen. This administrative action is effective immediately. pending a full federal investigation into flagged activities consistent with aggravated money laundering and illicit asset concealment. Do not attempt to access these funds. The call abruptly disconnected, leaving a hollow, echoing dial tone in his ear. A sudden flush of hot, primal panic surged up Arthur's neck. The automated voice had used the exact, terrifying terminology of federal prosecutors. Money laundering, asset concealment. His breathing turned shallow and ragged. This was completely impossible. I was supposed to fix the massive deficit, not trigger a catastrophic institutional lockdown. His eyes darted frantically back to the wooden box and locked intensely onto the black flash drive. In his rapidly mounting desperation, his legendary arrogance completely overrode his basic common sense. He desperately assumed the drive contained the actual funds, perhaps routed through a decentralized cryptocurrency exchange to bypass the frozen banking network, or maybe it held a digital confession he could use to frame me for the entire operation. He needed to know exactly what I had done. He needed a weapon to fight back. His hands trembling slightly, he grabbed the small flash drive and forcefully jammed it into the side port of his primary desktop computer. It was the most catastrophic mistake of his entire life. The exact instant the metal connectors touched, the customized digital payload I had coded in the dead of night executed with flawless, lethal efficiency. Arthur did not even have the time to reach for his wireless mouse. A black command prompt box exploded across his massive high-definition monitor, lines of aggressive code scrolling significantly faster than the human eye could possibly track. Deep within the company's hidden servers, the script systematically harvested the forged loan documents, the fake electronic signatures, and the hidden tax routing numbers I had uncovered hours earlier. With a completely automated, untraceable command, it compiled everything into a single, undeniable dossier of severe corporate fraud. Within seconds, it broadcasted the file directly to the personal email inboxes of every single member of his board of directors, followed instantly by a direct, heavily encrypted transmission to the independent auditing firm overseeing their quarterly compliance. Arthur slammed his fingers wildly across the mechanical keyboard, desperately trying to abort the process, trying furiously to sever the internet connection. But the machine was completely unresponsive to his physical commands. He was merely a helpless passenger in his own vehicle, watching it accelerate directly toward a reinforced concrete wall. Then, the scrolling code completely stopped. The massive monitor went entirely black. For a brief, agonizing second, the sprawling corner office was dead silent. Then, right in the center of the dark screen, a single, glowing, red padlock materialized. Below it, a flashing text cursor blinked rhythmically, mocking his absolute helplessness. He sat completely paralyzed in his luxurious leather chair, the blood draining entirely from his face. The horrific realization crashed down on him with the immense weight of a collapsing skyscraper. I had not just refused his unreasonable demand. I had turned his own greed into a perfectly designed guillotine, and he had just pulled the release lever all by himself. I did not need to be physically present in the room to know exactly how the dominoes began to fall. The algorithms I had unleashed were entirely predictable, and human greed is remarkably consistent. While Arthur sat paralyzed staring at the red padlock on his ruined screen, his personal cell phone shattered the silence. It was Chloe. She was not just crying. She was completely hysterical, her voice a shrill, piercing shriek of pure panic. She was standing in the middle of a high-end luxury salon in downtown Austin, wearing a robe and foils in her hair. 2 heavy-duty tow trucks had just pulled into the private parking lot, flanked by armed repossession agents. They had hooked up both of her leased European sports cars in broad daylight. When she stormed out to scream at them, waving her black credit card to pay whatever fine they demanded, the portable terminal declined it. It was not just declined, the agent informed her loudly, in front of a dozen wealthy socialites, that the account was flagged for severe federal fraud and the card was to be immediately confiscated. Arthur slammed the phone down, ignoring her frantic screaming. His shock rapidly mutated into a desperate, feral rage. He dialed my number, his thumb pressing into the screen hard enough to crack the glass. He expected me to answer, to apologize, to tell him it was all a big misunderstanding. Instead, a generic carrier voice informed him that the number was disconnected and no longer in service. Panic, cold and sharp, finally pierced his armor of arrogance. He yelled for his head of private security, ordering the man to drive immediately to my apartment and drag me back to the office by any means necessary. 30 minutes later, the security chief called back. He had breached the front door, but there was no one to drag. The apartment was a hollow shell. My clothes were gone. The server racks in the spare bedroom were completely empty. The only thing left behind was my set of apartment keys, resting neatly on the cold granite kitchen island. I had vanished into thin air. Before Arthur could even begin to process my disappearance, his private internal line rang. It was his lead corporate tax attorney, and the man sounded absolutely terrified. The Internal Revenue Service had just executed an emergency digital freeze on the primary holding company accounts. They were officially issuing an immediate, comprehensive audit. The attorney explained, his voice trembling, that an anonymous whistleblower had submitted a flawless, highly detailed map of their tax evasion network. The data perfectly matched the sudden, massive tax liabilities that had mysteriously routed directly to Arthur's personal Internet Protocol address earlier that morning. They were not just facing fines, they were looking at imminent federal indictments. The heavy oak doors of the executive office burst open. Chloe stormed in, her face red and streaked with ruined makeup. She had been forced to take a standard rideshare vehicle across town, an indignity that seemed to enrage her more than the actual loss of the cars. The moment she saw Arthur, the fragile alliance of their parasitic relationship completely disintegrated. "You told me you had her under control," Chloe screamed, sweeping a stack of useless financial reports off his desk. "You said she was going to transfer the $80,000. They took my cars. My cards are entirely blocked. My friends were laughing at me." Arthur erupted, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "Shut your mouth. This is your fault. If you and your idiot husband had not bled the ghost fund dry to pay for your pathetic luxury vacations, we would not have needed her signature in the first place. She completely locked me out. The federal government is auditing the entire network." They tore into each other like starving animals fighting over a scrap of meat in a cage, hurling vicious insults and placing the blame squarely on the other. But in the midst of his screaming fit, Arthur threw his hands down on the desk in frustration. His heavy gold watch slammed against the wooden box I had sent him. The impact dislodged a false panel on the bottom of the velvet lining. Arthur stopped mid-sentence. He picked up the box, turning it over. Taped securely to the hidden underside was a small black plastic square with a tiny rhythmic flashing green light. A commercial global positioning system tracker. He ripped it off the wood, a twisted manic smile slowly returning to his face. He grabbed a tablet from his desk drawer and quickly synced the serial number of the tracker to a public mapping application. A bright red pin dropped instantly onto the screen. It was transmitting a stationary signal from a remote, heavily wooded area in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina. In his supreme arrogance, Arthur's mind fabricated the exact narrative he desperately needed to believe. He did not see the tracker as a calculated trap. He saw it as a fatal mistake made by a frightened woman. He convinced himself that I had executed the cyber attack out of sheer panic and immediately fled to hide in the mountains. He firmly believed that because I was the architect of the lockdown, I still possessed the master encryption keys to reverse the damage, unlock the bank accounts, and delete the federal evidence before the authorities could physically arrive. "She is in North Carolina," Arthur growled, grabbing his suit jacket and storming toward the door. "She ran. She thinks she can hide from me." Chloe did not hesitate. The prospect of losing her lavish lifestyle was far more terrifying than any legal threat. They practically ran to the private parking garage, jumping into Arthur's heavy luxury sedan. They did not pack bags. They did not consult lawyers. Driven by pure, unadulterated desperation and blind rage, they merged onto the interstate highway. They were going to drive relentlessly across multiple state lines, determined to hunt me down and physically force me to fix the catastrophic mess they had created. They thought they were the predators closing in for the final kill. They had absolutely no idea they were just blindly following a trail of breadcrumbs leading directly into a federal slaughterhouse. A torrential downpour had completely swallowed the Blue Ridge Mountains by late afternoon. The sky morphed into a bruised, violent charcoal, unleashing heavy, unrelenting sheets of water that hammered against the tin roof of my isolated cabin. The storm was deafening, a chaotic symphony of thunder and wind that mirrored the utter destruction I had unleashed upon my former family. Yet inside the perimeter of my covered wraparound porch, there was absolute, perfect tranquility. I sat in a heavy, hand-carved wooden rocking chair, entirely shielded from the raging elements. I was wearing a thick-knit sweater, my legs crossed, holding a ceramic mug of steaming black coffee. I inhaled the rich, roasted aroma, watching the mud rivers form in the driveway. I did not feel fear. I did not feel anxiety. I felt the profound, weightless clarity of an architect watching a perfectly designed demolition. Through the dense gray curtain of the storm, a pair of intensely bright headlights violently pierced the gloom. A massive luxury sedan, coated in thick layers of highway grime and mountain mud, skidded dangerously off the main dirt road. The driver did not even attempt to brake properly. The heavy vehicle smashed directly through the flimsy wooden decorative gate at the edge of my property, tearing the lumber to splinters before slamming to a halt in the center of the muddy yard. The engine roared aggressively before being abruptly killed. The heavy doors of the vehicle flew open, instantly letting the torrential rain assault the interior. Arthur and Chloe practically fell out of the car. The visual was incredibly pathetic. Chloe was still wearing a silk salon robe over her ruined designer clothes, her expensive shoes sinking immediately deep into the thick, freezing mud. Arthur had clearly not stopped driving for a single moment since leaving Texas. His tailored suit was wrinkled and plastered to his skin by the rain, his face a terrifying mask of sleep deprivation, feral rage, and desperate panic. They looked exactly like what they were, parasites violently severed from their host, thrashing wildly in the harsh elements. They began to trudge through the deep mud toward the cabin, the heavy rain washing away the last remnants of their artificial dignity. "Hannah!" Arthur roared, his voice tearing through the sound of the thunder. It was not a father's voice. It was the desperate, terrifying bark of a cornered predator. "Get out here right now, you ungrateful, psychotic bitch!" Chloe was sobbing hysterically, slipping in the mud and clutching Arthur's arm. "Fix it! Turn my cards back on! They took everything!" I did not stand up. I did not flinch. I remained perfectly seated in the rocking chair, taking a slow, deliberate sip of my scalding coffee. I watched them struggle through the storm, observing them with the detached, clinical fascination of a scientist examining insects under a microscope. Arthur reached the bottom of the wooden porch steps. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving, his eyes completely bloodshot. He grabbed the wooden railing, preparing to charge up the steps and physically enforce his will. "You are going to log into your computer this exact second," Arthur commanded, pointing a trembling, furious finger directly at my face. "You are going to reverse the security freeze. You are going to clear the Internal Revenue Service audit flags, and you are going to transfer the funds to cover the deficit. If you do not fix this network right now, I swear to God, I will tear this entire cabin apart and break you with my bare hands." He took a heavy step onto the first wooden stair. I calmly lowered my coffee mug, resting it on my knee. I raised my right hand, extending a single finger, and pointed directly upward toward the eaves of the porch ceiling. Arthur paused, his violent momentum momentarily disrupted. He followed my gesture. Tucked discreetly beneath the wooden beams, completely protected from the rain, a high-definition security camera hummed quietly. A bright crimson light blinked rhythmically, recording every single frame of the yard and capturing perfectly clear audio of the entire confrontation. "Smile for the federal prosecutors, Arthur," I said, my voice completely flat, slicing through the chaotic noise of the rain with cold precision. The audio receptors on that model are incredibly sensitive. Arthur froze. The feral rage in his eyes flickered, briefly replaced by a flash of deep, profound confusion. Chloe stopped crying, staring blankly at the blinking red light. "You actually thought I ran away in a blind panic," I stated, leaning back into the rocking chair. "You thought you were a brilliant hunter tracking a wounded animal. You drove across multiple states because you found a tracking device taped to a wooden box. Did your monumental arrogance never allow you to consider that the person who systematically dismantled your entire financial empire in less than 12 hours might have left that tracker there on purpose? It was not a mistake, Arthur. It was a digital invitation, and you RSVP'd exactly on time." "What are you talking about?" Arthur spat, though his voice had lost its thunderous authority, replaced by a slight, undetectable tremor. I reached over to the small wooden table beside my chair and picked up a thick stack of pristine legal documents encased in a waterproof plastic folder. I tossed it lightly, letting it land with a soft thud near Arthur's muddy shoes on the top step. "That is a federal restraining order," I explained methodically. "It was signed by a federal judge at exactly 9 o'clock this morning. It was granted based on a massive dossier of evidence proving financial extortion, identity theft, and corporate fraud. It legally prohibits you from coming within 500 feet of my person." Arthur stared at the plastic folder, the color draining entirely from his rain-slicked face. His brain, usually so adept at manipulation, was struggling desperately to process the checkmate. "Economic fraud is a serious problem, Arthur," I continued, my voice carrying the steady rhythm of a lethal injection. "But crossing state lines with the explicit recorded intent to physically track, intimidate, and extort a witness who holds an active federal protection order? You just upgraded a complex white-collar financial investigation into a violent federal felony. You just committed interstate stalking and aggravated extortion. I needed you to come to me. I needed you to threaten me on camera to guarantee you would never, ever see the outside of a prison cell again." "You are bluffing," Arthur whispered, shaking his head in absolute denial. "You are my daughter. You would not do this." "I am not your daughter," I replied softly. "I am the architect of your ruin." Right on cue, the chaotic symphony of the thunderstorm was pierced by a new, terrifying sound. The sharp, aggressive wail of multiple sirens echoed through the mountain valley. Through the heavy trees at the back of my property, a blinding array of flashing red and blue lights cut through the gray afternoon. 3 heavily armored federal sport utility vehicles and 2 local sheriff cruisers skidded aggressively onto the muddy driveway, completely blocking Arthur's luxury sedan from the main road. The doors flew open. Men and women wearing heavy tactical gear and dark raincoats poured out into the storm. Their weapons were drawn, their voices booming over the thunder, commanding Arthur and Chloe to drop to their knees and put their hands behind their heads. Chloe let out a blood-curdling scream, collapsing face first into the freezing mud, sobbing hysterically as a local deputy roughly pulled her arms behind her back. Arthur did not scream. He did not run. He was violently shoved against the hood of his ruined luxury car by 2 federal agents. The harsh metallic click of the heavy steel handcuffs locking around his wrists sounded like a final, absolute judgment. As the agents pulled him upright to drag him toward the cruisers, Arthur wrenched his neck to look back at the porch. His eyes met mine. The arrogance, the authority, the terrifying shadow he had cast over my entire existence was completely gone. In its place was a bottomless, world-shattering horror. He finally realized that the safe he thought he owned had not just locked him out, it had detonated. I did not smile. I did not offer a dramatic speech. The toxic knot of my family had been violently, permanently severed. There was absolutely no forgiveness, only a brutally fair price paid in full. I simply maintained eye contact with the broken man in the mud, slowly raised my ceramic mug in a silent, final farewell, and took a long sip of my coffee as the police cars drove them away into the storm. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Haley Revenge Stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we'd love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you're listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.